The morning sunlight filtered through the wide glass windows of the corporate tower in downtown Chicago. The building gleamed with sleek modernity. Polished marble floors, tall ceilings, and employees bustling about with the nervous energy that only came with a place where ambition ruled over kindness. Amara Okafor walked into the office clutching her slim leather bag, her chin raised with quiet dignity. Her dark skin glowed softly against the morning light, and her natural curls framed her face, a crown of resilience she refused to tame for anyone's comfort. She was 32 years old, a proud immigrant from Nigeria who had come to the United States not just for opportunity but to prove, to herself and to the world, that she belonged in every room she walked into. But that belonging had not been freely given. Her coworkers noticed her from the first day, not for her talent, not for her sharp mind that could dissect reports in half the time it took anyone else, not for her relentless work ethic, but for her accent. "Did you hear her pronounce strategy?" One of them whispered in the break room. "It's like strategy or something." Laughter followed, quiet enough to be deniable but loud enough for Amara to catch when she passed by. Amara ignored it. She always ignored it, but ignoring did not make it disappear. Amara had always known her accent marked her. Back home in Lagos, she was a rising star in a multinational firm. Her British-influenced English had been seen as polished, educated, respectable. But in America, her voice carried different weight. It wasn't respected, it was a target. Still, she believed in the power of patience. Every late night she stayed at the office, finishing what her team left undone. She told herself the truth she had carried from her childhood. Excellence is the answer they cannot ignore. But excellence alone was not always enough. One Tuesday morning, Amara entered the open office space, the smell of freshly brewed coffee thick in the air. She settled into her cubicle and pulled out a stack of reports. The office chatter hummed like static behind her. "Hey, Amara!" A voice sang out from 2 desks away. It was Lindsay, one of the senior associates, known for her sharp tongue and smug smile. "Could you say quarterly earnings for me again?" The group around Lindsay chuckled. They were pretending to work, but their eyes were on Amara. Amara froze for a moment, her pen hovering over her notebook. She knew what this was. It wasn't the first time. "Excuse me?" Amara asked, her tone calm but cool. You say it differently," Lindsay smirked. "It sounds exotic." She dragged the last word out like chewing gum. The others laughed again. Not a loud, belly-shaking laugh, but the kind of chuckle people share when they know they're being cruel but think they're safe because their cruelty is wrapped in humor. Amara's jaw tightened, but she refused to give them what they wanted. Embarrassment, defensiveness, shame. She simply said, "I'll send my earnings report to your inbox before noon, Lindsay," and returned to her work. But inside, a storm brewed. That night, Amara sat in her small apartment staring at the city lights outside her window. Her chest was heavy. She remembered her father's words when she left Nigeria. "Do not bend yourself to be liked, Amara. Stand tall. Your value is not in their acceptance, but in your excellence." She repeated the words like a mantra, but the sting of mockery was not easy to erase. Still, Amara knew something the others did not. The board of directors was preparing to announce a new regional manager, a position of authority one step below the vice president. Rumors swirled around the office. Lindsay was convinced she was next in line. Others thought it would be Greg, a loud, confident man with years at the company. But Amara had been quietly working late nights, building reports that made their department shine, presenting data that won clients, and solving problems others could not. She had been meeting with executives behind closed doors, discussing long-term strategies. And though the whispers of mockery filled her days, she knew the board was watching. She just had to wait. The next week, the team gathered in the glass-walled conference room for a quarterly review. Amara sat with her notes neatly stacked, while Lindsay lounged in her chair with exaggerated confidence. Halfway through, the vice president of operations asked for projections on the Midwest branch's revenue. Greg cleared his throat, pulling up a chart on the screen. "We're estimating a 12% growth," he said proudly. The VP frowned. That's optimistic. What's your data source? Greg stammered, flipping through slides, but the numbers weren't lining up. A quiet unease spread across the table. Then the VP turned. Amara, do you have an alternative projection? The room went still. Everyone knew Amara's reports were thorough, but giving her the floor meant giving her credibility. Amara rose, her voice steady. Based on the client engagement trends and last quarter's operational costs, the realistic projection is 7.8%. She clicked to her slide, where graphs and charts appeared clear, detailed, undeniable. The VP studied it, then nodded. That aligns with our internal analysis. Excellent work, Amara. The silence that followed was heavy. Lindsay shifted in her chair. Greg avoided her eyes, and though Amara sat back down with calm composure, inside, her heart beat with quiet triumph. The whispers would continue. The laughter might not stop, but the cracks in their confidence had begun. That night, Amara received an email. It was short, direct, from the board. Final interviews for regional manager position. Thursday at 10 a.m. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. She knew her moment was coming. The office buzzed with energy the next morning. Coffee cups in hand, coworkers clustered in little knots, trading gossip about the upcoming promotion. The name regional manager floated through the air like a golden prize, every conversation wrapped in speculation. Amara walked past them, calm on the surface but burning with focus beneath her skin. She had read the email at least a dozen times before falling asleep. She wasn't naive, she knew the odds. People like her weren't often chosen for roles of power in spaces like this. But still, she believed in the work she had done, in the proof she carried within her reports and performance. Morning, Amara, Greg called across the hall with a sly grin. Practicing your interview answers in the mirror yet? Gonna show us how to say revenue instead of revenue. Laughter rippled through the group standing with him. Amara paused just long enough to give him a cool, measured look. I'll be ready for the interview, she said softly. Will you? Greg's smile faltered, and the group went silent for a moment. She didn't wait for their reply. She had bigger battles to fight. By mid-morning, Amara was at her desk combing through spreadsheets when Lindsay appeared, leaning against the cubicle wall with her arms crossed. You know, Amara, Lindsay said, her tone casual but her smile sharp. I heard you're on the shortlist for regional manager. That's surprising. Amara looked up slowly. Surprising? Well, yeah. I mean, Lindsay tilted her head, as if she were trying to be sympathetic. It's just, communication is such a big part of leadership. And you know, your accent. Sometimes it's hard for people to follow. Don't you think that might be a problem? It wasn't a question. It was a dagger wrapped in politeness. Amara set her pen down carefully. I've never had a problem making myself understood. Perhaps it's a matter of listening. For a moment, the two women locked eyes. Lindsay's smile faltered just slightly, but she covered it with a quick laugh and a shrug. Well, good luck then. We'll see how it goes. She walked away, but Amara's chest burned. It wasn't just about the accent. It was about the way they saw her, as less, as foreign, as not enough. That evening, Amara stayed late at the office. The building grew quiet, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across empty desks. She pored over reports, perfecting her analysis, rehearsing her presentation for the interview. But as she sat there alone, her mind drifted back to her childhood in Lagos. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table while her mother, a teacher, corrected her essays. Clarity, Amara, her mother would say. Always clarity. Don't just write what you think. Make it impossible to misunderstand. Her father, a stern but loving businessman, would often remind her, the world will find reasons to doubt you. Don't give them evidence. Give them results. Those words had carried her through college, through her first job, through every challenge since. And now, as she stared at the polished wood of the conference table where her future would be decided, she whispered them aloud. Don't give them evidence. Give them results. Thursday arrived. The tension in the office was palpable. Everyone knew the final interviews were happening. Greg strutted around in his tailored suit, shaking hands like he was already the manager. Lindsay wore a sleek black dress and heels, rehearsing her charm in every conversation. Amara arrived in a navy blue suit, elegant but understated. She walked with quiet confidence, though her stomach twisted with nerves. "Good luck," one of the junior associates whispered as she passed. His voice carried a hint of genuine respect. Amara offered him a small smile. She entered the boardroom at exactly 10 a.m. The panel of directors sat at the long table, their faces serious but welcoming. The vice president nodded. "Amara, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." She sat, placing her portfolio in front of her. Her palms were damp, but she kept her face composed. For the next 45 minutes, the questions came hard and fast. How would you handle underperforming branches? What strategies would you implement for long-term growth? How do you lead a team that doubts your authority? Amara answered each one with precision. She drew from her reports, her late-night research, her real-world problem-solving. She painted a vision not just of numbers, but of leadership. At one point, one of the directors asked, "Some employees may find it challenging to adapt to different communication styles. How do you address that as a leader?" Amara knew what they meant. She met their gaze directly. Communication is not only about pronunciation. It's about clarity, empathy, and intent. My team has never had trouble understanding my expectations. Because when I speak with purpose, and I back it with results. The room was silent for a moment. Then the vice president smiled slightly. "Thank you, Amara." When she left the room, her legs trembled, but her heart soared. She had given them everything. Back at her desk, the whispers were louder than ever. Greg cornered her at the coffee machine. "You really think you've got a shot at this? Be honest. You think the board's gonna put someone who talks like that in charge?" Amara looked at him, her face expressionless. "We'll find out, won't we?" Greg smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. That night, Amara went home exhausted. She collapsed on her couch, staring at the ceiling. She had done all she could. Now it was out of her hands. But in her heart, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Hope. The following Monday, the entire office was summoned to the conference hall for the big announcement. The regional vice president was there, standing on the stage with the board members behind him. The room buzzed with anticipation. Greg sat in the front row, his tie perfectly knotted. Lindsay perched beside him, her smile tight and expectant. Amara sat near the middle, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm but her pulse racing. The VP stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Over the past months, we've evaluated candidates for the position of regional manager. We've considered their performance, leadership potential, and vision for the future of this company. It was not an easy decision. But today, we're proud to announce." The room leaned in, holding its breath. "Amara Okafor." The hall erupted. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. Greg's jaw dropped. Lindsay blinked rapidly, her smile frozen in shock. Amara rose slowly, her steps measured as she walked to the stage. She could feel every eye on her, every ounce of disbelief pressing against her. But when she reached the podium, she lifted her chin and let her voice ring clear. "Thank you," she began, her accent strong, unwavering. "This promotion is not just about me. It's about what we can achieve together. I look forward to leading this region with excellence, with integrity, and with results." The applause began hesitantly at first, then grew louder, stronger, undeniable. Amara smiled. Her voice had carried her here, not in spite of her accent, but with it, and those who mocked her would never forget this moment. The applause still echoed in Amara's ears as she walked back to her seat, but the sound was mixed with something else. Silence. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of shock, of people recalibrating their understanding of her. She could feel their eyes trailing after her, the murmurs building like waves in the ocean. "Amara? Really?" Someone whispered behind her. "There's no way she can handle this," another muttered. But what they didn't realize was that the announcement was only the beginning. The first week of her promotion was a blur. Amara's nameplate was changed. Her office moved from a cubicle in the open floor to a glass-walled corner suite. The view stretched across the Chicago skyline, a panorama of steel and sky that made her chest swell with quiet pride. Yet pride was not the only thing she felt. There was tension, a sharp, cutting tension in every hallway she walked through. Greg avoided her gaze, his jaw clenched whenever she entered the room. Lindsay's smiles were more brittle than ever, plastered on like a mask, but her eyes burned with resentment. It was no secret that both of them had expected the role, and neither of them was willing to accept defeat gracefully. On her third day, Amara called her first leadership meeting. The entire department gathered in the conference room. She stood at the head of the table, her notes organized but her posture relaxed, projecting calm authority. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "As regional manager, my goal is simple: to ensure this team thrives, not just in numbers, but in collaboration and integrity." Greg leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, smirking faintly. Lindsay scribbled notes furiously, her pen scratching louder than anyone else's. Amara continued, laying out her strategy for increasing efficiency, building client relationships, and creating mentorship opportunities within the team. But midway through, Greg raised his hand. Amara," he said, drawing out her name with a mocking lilt. "I just want to clarify, when you say mentorship opportunities, do you mean like communication coaching? For people who might have difficulty being understood?" The room froze. Amara felt her spine stiffen, but she kept her face neutral. She met Greg's gaze steadily. "No, I mean creating an environment where talent is recognized and developed, regardless of background. Results are what matter here, not accents." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Some shifted in their seats, others avoided eye contact. Greg smirked again, as if satisfied with planting the seed. But Amara pressed on. Her voice never wavered, and when the meeting ended, she noticed something. 2 junior associates approached her quietly, thanking her for her words. Their eyes carried a respect she hadn't seen before. She realized something in that moment. Greg and Lindsay's mockery wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who felt different, everyone who had been made to feel small. And now she carried more than just her own fight. She carried theirs too. But the pushback came harder. The following week, Amara discovered that a client proposal she had finalized had been mysteriously delayed. Emails went unanswered, documents misplaced. When she traced the issue, she found that Lindsay had accidentally sent the wrong version of the file. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Lindsay said with wide, innocent eyes when confronted. It must have been a mix-up, but Amara knew better. She saw the calculation in Lindsay's gaze. The mistake was no mistake. Later that same week, Greg tried to undermine her during a presentation to the board. He interrupted her mid-sentence, questioning her data with an exaggerated laugh. "Are you sure about those numbers, Amara?" he asked. "They sound optimistic. Maybe you mean 7%, not 17. Some board members frowned, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. But Amara didn't flinch. She pulled up the spreadsheet, scrolling to the detailed calculations she had prepared. 17, she repeated firmly. "Here's the breakdown. You'll see the projected growth matches the client's forecast." The room went silent. The board members nodded slowly. One of them even smiled. Greg sat back, his smirk gone. By Friday, Amara was exhausted. The weight of proving herself day after day pressed heavy on her shoulders. That night, she sat in her office long after the others had left, the city lights glowing against the glass walls. She thought of her family back home, their pride, their hopes, their faith in her. She whispered to herself again, "Excellence is the answer they cannot ignore." But in her heart, she also knew something else. If Greg and Lindsay thought they could wear her down, they were mistaken. She would not just survive. She would thrive. The following Monday, Amara called another meeting. But this time she shifted the tone. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge something. I know not everyone in this room is comfortable with change, and I know some may question my leadership. But leadership is not about comfort, it's about growth. And if you're not ready to grow, you may not belong on this team." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. Greg's smirk vanished. Lindsay's pen stilled. Amara looked around the room, her gaze steady, unwavering. "From this day forward," she continued, "we will measure ourselves not by whispers, not by doubt, not by who talks the loudest, but by results. If you deliver results, you have a place here. If not, you don't." Slowly, a few people nodded. The junior associates from before met her eyes and smiled faintly. The tide was beginning to turn, but Amara knew this was just the beginning. Greg and Lindsay were not done, and neither was she. The office felt like a battlefield now, not one with swords and shields, but one where smiles had daggers, and silence carried as much weight as words. Amara had been regional manager for just over a month, and while some of the team had begun to rally behind her, Greg and Lindsay's hostility only deepened. They no longer bothered to hide it. It began subtly. A meeting invitation accidentally left Amara off the email chain. A client call scheduled at the wrong time zone. Reports submitted late or riddled with careless errors. Every incident could be explained away as a mistake, but Amara knew better. When she addressed Lindsay about missing documents, Lindsay tilted her head innocently. "Oh no! Did I forget to CC you? My bad. There are just so many moving pieces these days. You know how it is." And when Greg challenged her figures in front of the team again, he leaned back smugly as though he'd scored a victory. Amara refused to let her frustration show, but inside, she felt the sting. Not because they doubted her, but because she realized the depth of their resentment. They weren't just trying to make her look incompetent, they wanted her gone. One evening, Amara stayed late, combing through quarterly reports. She double-checked every number, every chart, every projection. Her diligence paid off when she uncovered something startling. Greg had submitted a revised sales forecast to the board, one that painted her leadership as ineffective. He hadn't sent it to her directly. Instead, he slipped it into a shared folder, hoping she wouldn't notice. Her jaw tightened as she read through the document. The errors weren't random, they were deliberate. Underreported revenue, inflated costs, skewed margins. If the board believed this, it would undermine her completely. For a long moment, she sat at her desk, staring at the glowing spreadsheet. Then slowly she smiled. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one. The next morning, Amara called a department-wide meeting. The air was tense as everyone shuffled into the conference room. Greg lounged in his chair with his usual arrogance. Lindsay perched on the edge of her seat, ready to pounce. Amara placed a folder on the table. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to address something that concerns not just me, but all of us. Transparency." She clicked the remote, and the screen lit up with two spreadsheets side by side. The official quarterly report and Greg's altered version. Gasps filled the room. "This," Amara said, pointing to the accurate numbers, "is our actual forecast. And this," she tapped the falsified one, "is the version that was quietly uploaded without my review." Greg shifted in his seat, color rising in his cheeks. "I don't know what you're implying," he began. Amara cut him off smoothly. "I'm not implying. I'm stating facts. These numbers were manipulated. And as of today, any attempt to misrepresent our data will be treated as a violation of company policy." Her tone was sharp but controlled, the kind of voice that left no room for debate. Silence fell. Even Lindsay's pen stayed still. For the first time, Greg looked unsettled. Later that day, Amara received an email from HR. Anonymous complaint regarding hostile work environment. She didn't need to guess who had filed it. The document accused her of being condescending, favoring certain employees, and creating division with her leadership style. Amara read it slowly, her chest tightening. It was clever, not overtly malicious, but phrased in a way that painted her as the problem. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if the board believes this? What if they see me as too aggressive? Too harsh? Too different? But then, she remembered her father's words back home. They may question your place, Amara, but never question it yourself. She straightened her back. If they wanted to play games, she would play, but on her terms. Instead of reacting defensively, Amara doubled down on her leadership. She implemented weekly check-ins with her team, creating space for open dialogue. She praised wins publicly, addressed challenges privately, and steadily built trust. To her surprise, more employees began coming to her office, some to ask advice, others just to talk. They confided in her about how Greg's arrogance had intimidated them, or how Lindsay's passive-aggressive remarks made them feel small. Amara listened, and in listening, she found allies. The very people Greg and Lindsay dismissed were now the ones rallying around her. But Greg wasn't finished. One afternoon, during a high-stakes client presentation, he tried one last move. The client, a major investor, asked a complex question about international expansion. Before Amara could answer, Greg jumped in. "Well, with Amara's background, I'm sure she has unique insights," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. The room froze. Everyone knew what he meant. For a split second, Amara felt the sting of humiliation. Her accent, her heritage, he was using it as a weapon again, cloaked in sarcasm. But this time, she didn't hesitate. "You're right, Greg," she said smoothly, meeting his gaze head-on. "My background does give me unique insights. For example, I understand international markets not as an outsider, but as someone who has lived them. That's why our growth strategy includes cultural adaptability, something our competitors often overlook. Now, if you'll allow me, I'll walk our client through the numbers." She turned back to the projector, unfazed, her voice steady. By the time she finished, the client was nodding enthusiastically. "Impressive," they said. "Exactly the perspective we need." Greg's smirk had vanished entirely. That night, Amara sat in her office once again, the city lights flickering like stars. She knew the war wasn't over. Greg and Lindsay would keep trying, perhaps in subtler ways. But she also knew something had shifted. They had tried to break her, to paint her as unfit. Instead, they had exposed themselves. And Amara? She had proven that resilience wasn't loud, it was steady. It was choosing to rise, even when others tried to drag you down. For the first time since her promotion, she felt not just like a manager, but a leader. And she knew the real reckoning was yet to come. The tension in the office had reached a breaking point. On the surface, everything looked normal, emails flying back and forth, meetings scheduled, coffee cups clinking in the break room. But beneath it all, a storm was brewing. Greg and Lindsay had grown quieter, but their silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Amara felt it, like a predator circling just beyond the light, waiting for the right moment to pounce. The opportunity came during preparations for the annual regional review, a major corporate event where leaders presented their performance metrics to the board and shareholders. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a test, a chance for regional managers to prove their value or risk being replaced. Amara poured herself into the work. She spent late nights refining projections, cross-checking reports, and rehearsing her delivery. She knew eyes were on her, not just as a manager, but as a new kind of manager, one whose presence challenged long-held biases in the company's culture. Greg and Lindsay, meanwhile, were unervingly compliant. They submitted reports on time, offered polite smiles, and even attended her prep sessions without protest. To anyone else, it looked like they'd finally accepted her leadership. But Amara wasn't fooled. The night before the review, she received an urgent email marked confidential. It was a set of slides, supposedly the final version of the presentation deck. She opened it, her stomach tightening. The data had been altered, again. Revenue growth was understated, costs exaggerated, market opportunities erased. Worse, the graphs looked sloppy, as if thrown together at the last minute. If she walked into that review with this deck, it would look like she had mismanaged the region. Her jaw clenched. It was their boldest move yet. They weren't just undermining her, They were setting her up for public humiliation. For a brief moment, doubt whispered in her ear. Maybe they'll succeed. Maybe tomorrow will be the end. But then she remembered the night she arrived in America, stepping off the plane with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream. She remembered the long hours at university, the part-time jobs, the countless times someone told her she didn't belong, and how she proved them wrong, again and again. No, this would not break her. She reopened the accurate version of the data she had saved to her personal drive and worked through the night, tightening every slide until it gleamed with precision. By sunrise, her deck was flawless. The day of the review arrived. The conference hall buzzed with energy, filled with executives, investors, and managers from across the country. Screens glowed with company logos. Polished suits mingled, shaking hands, whispering strategies. Amara sat near the front, her deck queued up, her heart steady. Greg and Lindsay were across the aisle, whispering to each other, their faces smug. They believed she was walking into the trap they'd set. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO announced from the stage, "please welcome our regional manager for the East Division, Amara Okoye." Polite applause rippled through the room. Amara rose, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked to the podium. She adjusted the microphone, clicked the remote, and her first slide lit up the massive screen. Her voice was calm, steady. "Good morning. Today I want to show you not just numbers, but a story of resilience, strategy, and growth." As she spoke, the room grew quiet. Her slides were immaculate. Revenue up 15%, costs trimmed strategically, market share expanding into untapped demographics. Each figure flowed into the next, painting a picture not of survival, but of thriving under her leadership. Investors leaned forward, nodding. Executives scribbled notes. And then came the moment. One of the board members raised a hand. "We've seen an alternate version of these numbers, much less favorable. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Greg's lips curled into a smile. Lindsay smirked, her pen tapping against the table. This was it, the trap snapping shut. But Amara was ready. "Yes," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I discovered that version myself. And I want to be clear, it does not reflect reality. In fact," she clicked to her next slide, "I can show you exactly where the alterations were made." The screen lit up with side-by-side comparisons. Every manipulated number circled in red. Gasps filled the room. "These figures," Amara continued, her voice sharpening, "were tampered with, intentionally. But as you can see, when cross-checked against verified reports, the truth is undeniable. This region is not failing. It is thriving." She let the silence hang, heavy and damning. All eyes turned toward Greg and Lindsay. Their smugness evaporated, replaced by pale shock. The CEO leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea how these altered figures made it into circulation?" Amara didn't flinch. "I have my suspicions, but I believe the board values evidence more than speculation. The truth is in the data, and the data speaks for itself." By the time she finished, the applause was louder, stronger. The investors were impressed, the executives intrigued. She had not only defended herself, she had elevated herself. But the fallout was swift. After the session, Greg and Lindsay were summoned by HR. They returned to the office days later with tight lips and lowered heads, stripped of their influence. Rumors swirled, written warnings, formal investigations, possible demotions. Meanwhile, Amara's inbox flooded with congratulations. Colleagues who once doubted her now praised her leadership. Clients requested meetings with her directly, bypassing others. The tide had turned. That evening, Amara stood by her office window, watching the city lights shimmer. She felt the weight of exhaustion, but also the thrill of victory. Not the kind of victory that comes from crushing enemies, but the quieter, more profound triumph of standing tall in the face of sabotage and proving, through skill, grace, and unshakable resolve, that she belonged. She thought back to every mocking laugh, every whispered joke about her accent, every attempt to make her small. And she whispered, to no one in particular, You thought my voice was weakness, but it was my power all along. For more interesting stories like this, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.